The last person I expected to show up on my birthday was a stranger carrying a sleepy little girl in his arms. By then, I had already accepted that no one was coming. Not my business partners. Not the executives who once lined up outside my office. Not the friends who used to fill my calendar with dinner invitations. The expensive flowers arranged along the windowsill had been delivered by assistants following instructions from their secretaries. The gift baskets had arrived with printed cards, signed by people who couldn't spare 30 seconds for a phone call. The room was beautiful, quiet, perfect, and painfully empty. I stared through the hospital window as snow drifted across the parking lot, wondering how a woman who had built $1 billion company could somehow lose everyone who mattered. 6 months earlier, my life had fit inside a private jet. Now it fit inside a wheelchair. My name is Victoria Hayes, and until the accident, I believed success could solve almost anything. I was wrong. The crash happened on an icy highway after a late-night board meeting. A truck lost control. My driver never had a chance. When I woke up days later, the doctors explained that my spinal cord had been severely damaged. I would never walk again. The words echoed in my mind for weeks. Never. The hardest part wasn't the wheelchair. It was discovering how quickly people disappear when you no longer have something they need. Meetings stopped. Invitations disappeared. Even relatives who once bragged about being connected to me suddenly became too busy to visit. Apparently, my value had never been who I was. It had been what I could do for them. My rehabilitation center overlooked a small city park where families laughed. Children built snowmen, and couples walked hand in hand. Every afternoon I watched them from my window, pretending it didn't hurt. On my 52nd birthday, I told the nurses not to organize anything. No cake. No balloons. No celebration. There was nothing worth celebrating. Around 6 that evening, someone knocked gently on my open door. I expected another nurse. Instead, a man wearing a worn winter jacket stood there awkwardly holding a paper bag. A little girl with curly brown hair peeked from behind his leg. "I'm sorry," he said. "I think we're in the wrong room." Before I could answer, the little girl noticed the untouched birthday balloons tied beside my bed. "Daddy," she whispered loudly, "it's her birthday." The man looked embarrassed. "Oh. I'm so sorry. We were actually looking for room 412, my daughter wanted to deliver cookies to her grandmother." I smiled weakly. "That's okay." The little girl studied my face for several seconds. Then she asked the question adults were always too polite to ask. "Why are you alone?" Her father immediately apologized. "I'm so sorry. Emily doesn't always have a filter." I surprised myself by laughing. "It's all right." Because the truth was simple. I guess everyone had something more important to do. Emily frowned as if that explanation made no sense. Nobody should be alone on their birthday. She looked at her father. "We can't leave." He hesitated. "I'm sure she has plans." I glanced at the silent room. "I don't." Emily marched inside without waiting for permission. She reached into the paper bag and pulled out a container wrapped with a red ribbon. "Grandma won't mind sharing." Her father sighed with the defeated smile only parents understand. "I'm Daniel," he said. "Victoria." They stayed for 10 minutes. Then 20. Then an hour. Daniel explained that he worked as a school janitor during the day and drove for a food delivery service at night after his wife passed away from cancer 3 years earlier. Emily had become his entire world. They didn't have much money, but somehow they laughed more than anyone I'd met in years. Emily insisted we divide the homemade cookies equally. She even sang "Happy Birthday" slightly off-key while Daniel clapped along. It was the smallest birthday celebration I'd ever had. It was also the most meaningful. Before leaving, Emily hugged me. You can borrow my daddy anytime you feel lonely. Daniel turned bright red. I'm really sorry. But for the first time in months, I wasn't lonely. The next Saturday they came back. Not because they felt obligated. Because they wanted to. Daniel brought coffee. Emily brought crayons and declared, we were making birthday cards for other patients who didn't receive visitors. Soon every Saturday became our tradition. We played board games with veterans. Read stories to children. Delivered flowers to patients with no family nearby. Somehow the woman who had once spent millions acquiring companies discovered that the greatest investment required nothing but time. One afternoon I asked Daniel why he kept visiting. He looked genuinely confused. Because you're our friend. Friend. Such an ordinary word. Yet nobody from my old life had earned it. As my strength slowly returned, I began reviewing documents from my company. Without my daily supervision, several executives had started exploiting employees, cutting healthcare benefits, and manipulating financial reports to increase quarterly profits. The company I had built with purpose was becoming something I no longer recognized. My board expected me to retire quietly. Instead, I scheduled a meeting. When I rolled into headquarters for the first time after the accident, conversations stopped. People stared. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked guilty. During the meeting, I listened carefully. Then I fired 3 executives for fraud. I restored employee benefits. Created paid family leave. Established scholarships for workers' children. And announced a foundation supporting spinal cord injury research and single-parent families. One board member objected. These changes will reduce profits. I smiled calmly. No. They'll reduce greed. News spread quickly. Employees who had been afraid to speak finally found their voices. Productivity increased. Customer loyalty reached record levels. It turned out kindness wasn't bad for business after all. Months later, I invited Daniel and Emily to visit corporate headquarters. Emily's eyes grew wide as she explored the enormous building. Is all this yours? I shook my head. No. It belongs to everyone who works here. Daniel admired the renovated employee daycare center. You really changed this place. I looked at him. No. You changed me. He laughed. I only brought cookies. You brought humanity. Near Christmas, I quietly asked my legal team to create a scholarship fund in Daniel's late wife's name. I also arranged flexible work opportunities that allowed him to spend evenings with Emily instead of delivering food. When he discovered what I'd done, he drove straight to my office. I can't accept charity. I handed him a framed photo. It showed the 3 of us laughing. During my 2nd birthday celebration at the rehabilitation center. This isn't charity. It's family helping family. Tears filled his eyes. No one has ever called us family before. They do now. The following spring, the rehabilitation center invited me to speak to newly injured patients. As I looked across the room filled with frightened faces, I remembered believing my own life had ended. I used to think losing my ability to walk was the greatest tragedy of my life. I told them. But it wasn't. The greatest tragedy was the person I had become before the accident. I measured success by stock prices. I measured people by influence. I measured life by achievement. I paused, looking toward Daniel and Emily sitting in the front row. Then 2 strangers accidentally walked into my hospital room. They gave me something money never could. They reminded me that the richest people aren't those who have the most. They're the ones who give the most. The room fell silent. Some patients cried. Others smiled through their tears. That evening we returned to my house. Not the lonely mansion that once echoed with silence. Now it overflowed with laughter. Emily had covered the refrigerator with drawings. Daniel was teaching me his famous chili recipe while insisting I was adding too much salt. Neighbors dropped by carrying homemade desserts. Employees visited with their families. Children ran through the backyard chasing fireflies. As the sun disappeared beyond the trees, Emily climbed onto my lap. Guess what? What? You weren't alone this birthday either. I looked around at the people filling every corner of the house. She was right. Life hadn't given me back my legs. It had given me something far more valuable. A second chance to understand what truly makes a person wealthy. Not power. Not titles. Not money. Love. The kind that asks for nothing in return. The kind that walks through an open hospital door, carrying nothing more than homemade cookies and an open heart. Sometimes the people who change your life aren't the ones with the biggest names or the deepest pockets. Sometimes they're simply ordinary people who refuse to let another human being celebrate a birthday alone. And in a world that often feels too busy to notice someone else's pain, that kind of kindness becomes the greatest miracle of all.